Hey everyone, and welcome to the show. Have you ever thought about how one single secret kept hidden for years and years can impact a whole family? Like one decision made a long time ago just ripples through generations and changes everything.
It's really something, isn't it? The choices people make, especially under pressure, have consequences you wouldn't even believe. Consequences that affect people who don't even know the whole story.
Right. It's like this hidden undercurrent that shapes people's lives without them even realizing it. And today, we're diving deep into a story that's all about that. Family secrets, the search for identity, and how the past can reach out and grab you even decades later. It's historical, it's personal, and it's definitely going to make you think. If you love stories about hidden connections and the echoes of the past, hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss out on future deep dives.
Today's deep dive comes from the novel Once You Were Mine by Elizabeth Langston. We'll have a link to it on Amazon in the show notes. Langston really knows how to weave a story. She slowly uncovers layers of family relationships and hidden truths, touching on some really profound ideas about motherhood, what it means to belong, and all the unspoken expectations society can put on us.
And it's a story that unfolds across time, which is what makes it so fascinating.
Yeah.
We got this incredible material from one of our listeners that takes us into two different timelines. In 1969, we meet a young woman facing some really tough decisions about her pregnancy. Then, decades later, we see another woman using DNA technology to uncover some pretty shocking family connections. So today, we're going to try and understand these stories, how they're intertwined, and what they tell us about family and identity.
It's not just about what happened, it's about why it happened. The motivations, the context, all the things that shaped the decisions made back then and how those decisions still matter today.
Okay, so let's start back in 1969 with Molly. We meet her at a really pivotal moment in her life. She's pregnant, unmarried, and caught in a world where that was, well, a huge deal.
Oh, absolutely. In 1969, being an unwed mother was pretty much taboo. There was a lot of shame and stigma attached to it, not just for the woman herself, but for her whole family.
Yeah, we see that right away as Molly's getting ready to leave home. There's this hushed argument you can barely hear. Her mother's not even speaking, and it's just heavy with unspoken anxieties. But then, the way Molly packs, it's almost like she's on autopilot, methodical. But what she takes with her is so telling. Her records, a Bee Gees poster, things that are so her. But then she packs encyclopedias, science books, even her copies of A Wrinkle in Time and The Prophet. It's like she's holding on to this intellectual, curious side of herself. And then there's this Murano glass paperweight, a gift from someone named Galen, which makes you wonder about their connection. It's all so deliberate. She's taking pieces of her identity with her, like she knows a part of her is about to get lost.
You're right, it's so poignant. It's like she's using these things to cling to who she is in this situation where she's losing control over her own life.
And the whole leaving scene is just heartbreaking. Her dad's trying to sneak them out early before the neighbors see. Her mom's silent goodbye from the car. It just screams shame and secrecy. And when Molly whispers, "Please, Daddy, don't leave me," you just feel her fear. It's so raw, like she's being abandoned.
She is, in a way, isn't she? She's being sent away to protect the family's reputation, not because they actually want to support her.
And where they send her, the Eastern Carolina home for mothers and babies, even the name sounds ominous. And then you meet the director, Mrs. Lloyd. She's like the embodiment of strictness, not exactly a comforting presence.
No, not at all. Mrs. Lloyd just radiates authority, and her first order of business is to rename Molly as Eve. It's like she's erasing Molly's identity right from the start. This was pretty common practice back then. Sever the connection to their past, reinforce the shame.
It's chilling, really. Even something like confirming Molly's birthday and due date. It feels cold and impersonal. Then there's the assistant director, Mrs. Wilson. And you can see Molly, or Eve, I guess, just sort of shutting down and going along with everything. Like she knows there's no point in fighting it.
It's a survival mechanism, you
Yeah.
know? When you have no control over your own life, you learn to go along with it just to get by.
And in this whole oppressive environment, it's another resident, Miriam, who provides a bit of human connection. Their first interaction is so blunt. Miriam just comes right out and says, "Welcome to hell." But then they laugh together. It's this small moment of shared understanding that just breaks the tension.
It's so important, that shared laughter. In a situation where they're both isolated and judged, finding someone who gets it, even in a dark humor kind of way, can be life-saving.
Yeah, it's like a tiny spark of humanity in this bleak place. And even though life at the home is super strict, early lights out, assigned chores, The whole 9 yards, you see this connection growing between Molly and Miriam. And there's this one detail that really gets me. Molly picks out these tiny outfits for Delilah's baby to wear home with her adoptive parents. A plain white crocheted one, and then a little yellow dress with a kitten on it. So thoughtful.
Yeah, it really shows Molly's caring nature. She's going through so much herself, but she's still thinking about making things a little bit better for someone else.
There's also this postcard from Molly's grandmother, addressed to "My dearest Anne." It's all cheerful, talking about camellias blooming and inviting Molly to visit in the summer. It's like this glimpse into a different life. But Molly has this internal conflict about her grandmother, suggesting that maybe their relationship wasn't all sunshine and roses.
It shows how complicated family dynamics can be. Even something seemingly positive, like a summer invitation, can be loaded with past baggage.
And things get even more complicated when Molly meets with the social worker, Mrs. Kinsley. Mrs. Kinsley brings up the birth of Molly's niece, Susan. And it almost feels like she's comparing the two situations, trying to guilt Molly.
Yeah, Mrs. Kinsley is definitely using some manipulative tactics. She's trying to steer Molly towards adoption by making her feel like she's giving up something precious.
But the real gut punch comes when Molly's dad visits. He makes up these lame excuses for why no one from home has contacted her, and then just flat out refuses to acknowledge the baby as his grandchild. Then he gives her $5 and tells her she's on her own getting home after the birth. And it's just assumed that she's giving the baby up for adoption. He doesn't even ask her about it.
Wow, that is so harsh. It really shows how much pressure there was on families to avoid any kind of scandal back then. He's prioritizing appearances over his own daughter's well-being.
It's really devastating.
Yeah.
Then we see Molly in the hospital after giving birth. She's disoriented, everything smells like antiseptic and flowers, and she just wants to hold her baby. But the nurses won't let her. And then she gets hit with another bombshell. Dr. Lamb tells her she had twins, a boy and a girl.
You can only imagine how overwhelming that must have been. She's already dealing with so much, and then she finds out there are two babies.
It's like things just keep getting worse. Then Mrs. Lloyd and Mrs. Kinsley show up at the hospital pushing adoption papers on her. Molly, she's still recovering, she's reeling from the news about the twins, and she just begs them to wait until her family gets there. But they tell her no one's coming, not even her Aunt Trudy. They're just so cold and matter-of-fact about it.
Yeah.
You can just feel Molly's utter hopelessness.
It's so cruel. They're taking advantage of her vulnerable state to pressure her into signing away her rights.
But then Miriam steps in, like a guardian angel. She finds out Molly's twins are going to be separated and immediately offers to help Molly escape with her daughter Diana. She's like, train, bus, or car. She's not messing around.
It's a powerful moment of female solidarity. Miriam sees what's happening and knows she has to do something drastic to help.
And she's smart about it, too. She says they can't risk public transportation because they'll be watched, so they wait for Trudy to arrive in her big black Continental. It's all very hush-hush, very tense. And Miriam tells Molly to leave everything behind. They can't risk getting caught with anything that could identify them.
The stakes are so high, they both know that if they're caught, they could lose everything.
And even after the escape, things are still so complicated. Trudy is furious when she finds out what happened. She's ready to raise hell with Mrs. Lloyd. But then, even though she offers to hide Molly at their grandmother's, she tells Molly that raising a baby will only make their lives harder. It shows how deeply these societal pressures ran, even among people who cared about Molly.
Yeah, it's a tough situation. Trudy wants to help, but she also believes that adoption is the best option, even if it breaks Molly's heart.
Fast forward now to 2024, 2025. We meet Allison, living a pretty ordinary life. Good job, nice house, everything seems pretty stable, a world away from what Molly went through.
It's interesting how Langston sets up that contrast, right? Allison's life seems so secure, but it's about to get turned upside down.
Totally. And that turning point comes when Bree casually mentions getting her DNA results back from Ancestry. Turns out, they're cousins. And not just any cousins. Bree's mom, Heather, is Allison's dad's sister. Talk about a family bombshell. Allison tells her parents, and her dad, Everett, is just floored. He keeps looking at this framed photo of his family like he can't believe what he's hearing.
These home DNA tests have really changed the game when it comes to family secrets. Things that were hidden for years are suddenly coming to light.
It's mind-blowing, isn't it? So then Allison talks to Galen, who confirms that Heather is their sister. He's horrified to learn he has a daughter he never knew about, and it turns out Everett and Heather were full siblings. So like revelation after revelation, and Galen even says no one ever told him he had a daughter. It's like there's this huge hole in their family history.
You can imagine the guilt and regret he must be feeling. He was robbed of the chance to know his own child.
So Allison keeps digging, trying to find out more about her birth mother. She contacts Gwendolyn Reeves, an account manager at Ancestry, and asks for any information she can get. She even requests that Heather be the one to reach out, which I think is really respectful.
Absolutely. She's been very careful and sensitive, recognizing that this is ultimately her mother's decision to make.
Meanwhile, Bree's going through her own emotional roller coaster. She finds a box of old letters at her grandma's house, and get this, a bank statement from May 1969 with canceled checks made out to the Eastern Carolina home for mothers and babies. And they're signed by her grandfather, Marvin Harper. The dates, the amounts, it all starts to add up.
Those canceled checks are like tangible proof of the past. They connect the dots in a way that's undeniable.
And one of the dates is especially significant, March 31st, 1969, Everett's birthday. And right there on the statement, it says relinquishment, meaning he was given up for adoption, and then, just 3 weeks later, Heather was relinquished too. It's all very clinical and detached, but behind those words, there's this whole story of heartbreak and loss.
It's a reminder that the adoption process back then was often very impersonal and bureaucratic. The focus was on the legal transaction, not necessarily the emotional well-being of the people involved.
So Allison eventually gets to meet Everett, who, remember, is actually her uncle. He's surprised, of course, but they start talking, even make plans to go swimming together. It's small, but it's like the beginning of a new kind of family bond.
It's those little moments that matter, the everyday interactions that help people connect and build relationships.
Then we get introduced to Ward Palmer, who's connected to Gwendolyn Reeves through his work at a church. It makes you wonder about the role of religious institutions in adoptions back then.
It's definitely something to think about. Religious institutions were often involved in adoption practices, and it's interesting to consider how that influenced things.
And then comes the big moment. Gwendolyn calls Molly and tells her that one of her twins reached out. Molly reads the text, and it hits her. She's been living just miles from Everett for 30 years and never knew it.
It's almost unbelievable, isn't it? All those years, so close, and yet worlds apart.
They finally talk on the phone. It's brief, but so emotional. You can hear the weight of all those years of separation in their voices.
It's a huge step for both of them, acknowledging the past and opening the door to a possible future together.
And Molly is so hesitant about contacting Allison. She wants to respect Allison's choice, which I think speaks volumes about her character. But eventually, she agrees to a reunion.
It's a complicated situation, and she's handling it with a lot of grace and sensitivity.
The reunion itself is a little awkward at first, which is understandable, but you can tell everyone's trying. Molly and Galen even walk together, which is a good sign.
It's a moment of healing, a chance for these family members to finally connect after all these years.
And when Molly and Galen talk privately by the river, he apologizes for everything that happened, and she accepts his apology. It's like this huge weight has been lifted.
Forgiveness is such a powerful thing. It's the key to moving forward and building healthy relationships.
And then, just when you think all the pieces of the puzzle are in place, there's one last detail. It turns out Heather's birth date was changed on the records, probably to make the adoption go through faster. It's a reminder of how much control the system had back then and how easily things could be manipulated.
Yeah. It's a reminder that the adoption process wasn't always ethical or transparent. The focus was often on expediency, not the well-being of the people involved.
So we've gone on this journey through time, following Molly's story and Allison's story. We've seen how family secrets can shape lives, how societal pressures can force people into impossible choices, and how DNA technology can rewrite our understanding of who we are.
And it's not just about the past. These stories make us think about the choices we make today and how they might impact future generations.
So, what do you think? What resonated with you the most? Did any part of this story make you think about your own family history? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, hit that like button and share it with your friends.
Don't forget to subscribe for more fascinating stories and in-depth conversations. We'll see you next time.